kick things off by talking about the ship's history. I think it's important to know her history to be able to fully appreciate her, and this will also add context for a lot of the different stories we're going to talk about as we go throughout the tour tonight. All right? So the RMS Queen Mary, which we're all standing on, was originally owned and operated by the Cunard Line. This was one of the two largest passenger shipping lines in England, but also in the world at the time of her inception, when plans first began in 1926. Now, plans began for two ships, the Queen Mary and her sister ship, the Queen Elizabeth. Now, I did forget to mention Cunard. They were one of the two, right? Their big rival was the White Star Line. Does anyone know what the White Star Line's famous for?
Titanic.
Good, somebody's heard of the ship. I was worried nobody knew what Titanic was. Yeah, they were big rivals. Can't overstate that enough. That will be important here in just a second. Now, Cunard wanted to have the biggest, the fastest, most luxurious ocean liners in the world with these two ships. What they wanted is to be able to offer a weekly express transatlantic service between Great Britain and North America with just two ships. It had taken them 4 ships to do that in the past. They wanted to do it with just 2. So construction would begin in 1930 at the John Brown Shipyard in Clydebank, Scotland. But it would stop a year later because of the Great Depression. So for 2 whole years, this ship would sit there, unfinished, gathering 2 tons of rust on its hull, while the future of the ship, but also the future of Cunard as a company, remained uncertain. They would file for bankruptcy during the Great Depression. This would lead them to petition Parliament for the funds to continue constructing their vessels in hopes of saving their company. But their rival, the White Star Line, they were facing the same financial hardships. So you have both companies competing for a government bailout, if you will, and Parliament says, we would love to support both companies, but we can't afford to support 2 major companies. However, if you could agree to merge, we could support one enterprise. Since they had no other options, they did merge. They became the Cunard White Star Line, and construction would resume a short time later. Now, if you are interested in mergers, acquisitions, I'm going to turn this thing down, there's too much chatter there. If you're interested in that kind of thing, this was actually a very lengthy process. It's not just as easy as saying, yeah, we're going to merge. It was a lot of back and forth negotiations, kind of like the FTC oversees mergers today to make sure there's no monopoly. Cunard made sure that they maintained the majority shares so that after the war, 1947, they were doing so well financially, they actually fully absorbed White Star, dropped the name White Star, and they became Cunard once again. They still exist, they're just owned by the Carnival Cruise Holdings Company. Now, she was launched in September of 1934. When a ship is launched, that is actually the first time the hull itself touches the water. There's nothing installed in the ship yet. None of the boilers, engines, machinery, the decks and interiors, that's added after the fact, when she's floating in the water during her outfitting phase. So it'd take another 18 months of construction before she's ready to set sail. Also, at the time she was launched, she was christened by her namesake, Her Majesty Queen Mary, who was Mary of Teck, did break that champagne bottle on the bow of the ship. And a little bit of lore for you, if you didn't know this, shipbuilding and mariner life in general is surrounded by superstitions. One of those superstitions, you never call a ship by its designated name until it is officially christened at the time of its launch. So up until that time, it was just job number 534. Until that champagne bottle broke on the front, it slid in the River Clyde, and was henceforth known as the Queen Mary. Now, May 27, 1936, she would set sail on her maiden voyage. Going from Southampton, England, she would make a short stopover in Cherbourg, France, then head on to New York City. This was her usual transatlantic route. Southampton to New York and then back on a return voyage, usually taking her about 4.5 to 5 days time, weather depending, because of her speed. She was very fast. 25 to 32 knots was her average cruising speed. That's about 30 to 35 miles per hour. A little bit of context for you, Titanic, which came 18 years earlier than her construction, I should say, was actually more like 22 years before her maiden voyage. Titanic's top speed was 23 knots, and the Queen's cruising speed was 25 to 32. So she was a very fast ship. Very fast in 1936, still very fast, even by today's standards. Modern cruise ships, they don't go anywhere near that fast. They don't have to. It's about the voyage itself. This was in the 1930s. You couldn't just hop on a plane and fly across the ocean. You had to take a ship and do that. And as today, time was money. For the passengers, it meant more time at their destination. For the company, faster turnaround voyages meant more paying passengers and more revenue coming from the ship. Now, the first 3 years of her career, she was incredibly successful. This was a luxurious ocean liner. 3 class configurations. First class, second class was called cabin class, and third class would be called tourist class. But even if you were tourist class, which was third class, the lowest on the ship, you had money to travel on a ship like this. In today's money, if you wanted a round-trip voyage in 1936 and you were a first-class passenger, for a stateroom, you would be paying about $25,000. If you were a second-class passenger, you would be paying about $15,000. If you were a third-class passenger, you would be paying about $10,000 for a round-trip voyage on this ship. So no matter where you were, you had money. And in first class, you would see a lot of celebrities, a lot of movie stars, dignitaries, heads of state, even members of the royal family would travel aboard the ship. Now, 1939, the world would see the beginning of World War II when Great Britain entered the war arena by declaring war with Germany. This ship was actually mid-Atlantic whenever that happened on a 4-day voyage. She was 2 days into this voyage, had 2 days left before she arrived in New York, and everyone found out at the same time that this was what was happening. There are speakers, you see that speaker over there on the wall that's playing that music? Those are original to the ship. This was the first ship with a public addressment system. They would use it to play music for the passengers' enjoyment, but they would also use it to broadcast world news if something major was happening on land. And so everyone on this ship, all 3,200 people, that's 2,000 passengers, 1,200 crew, found out at the same time World War II was officially underway. Now the company knew this was a threat and a possibility for that voyage, so they did have wartime measures in place that they implemented at that time. So they sent all the cabin stewards around with buckets of black paint. They painted all 2,000 portholes and windows black from the inside for the remainder of that voyage. All exterior lights were turned off for the remainder of the voyage, and no one was allowed on deck to smoke or do anything that might draw attention to the ship or give its whereabouts away, just in case there were U-boats in the vicinity. She also began traveling in a serpentine pattern, zigzagging course every 10 miles or so like a serpent, just in case there was a U-boat that released a torpedo. She would be long gone before any torpedo were able to reach her to sink her. Now, on that voyage, there were a couple celebrities. One of them were, actually 3 of them, were the Three Stooges, and Bob Hope was the other. Now, Bob Hope saw how stressed out everyone was, obviously so, and he decided he wanted to do something to help raise everyone's spirits if he could. So he got with the ship's captain and decided he was going to offer a command performance in the first class lounge where we're going right after we leave this area here. And they actually broadcast that throughout the whole ship. And Bob Hope saw this as a unique position that he was in, being able to use his platform and his talents as a way to bolster people's spirits in the face of war and uncertain times. So that's actually what prompted him to start the USO tours that he did throughout the rest of his life, was what happened right here on the ship at the beginning of World War II. Now, she would successfully reach New York, and all passengers would disembark safely. But she began the war just sitting there in the harbor. For the first few months, they were just paying money to rent out her port, because they weren't sure how they were going to use the ship during the war. It wouldn't be until March of 1940 she was drafted into military service. She would be used primarily as a troop transport ship, but she would also be used as a hospital ship and a prisoner of war transport. For this to happen, she was taken to Singapore, then on to Australia, where all of her interiors were removed so they could be preserved. She was painted battleship gray on her exterior. She was outfitted with guns and anti-aircraft weapons. And also, evolving types of technology like sonar and radar were added to her at that point as well. And she would keep those after the war was over. Now, she began serving in 1940, transporting troops at about 5,000 per crossing. So remember, as a passenger ship, her configuration was for 3,200 people, but she was taking 5,000 troops in 1940. However, by 1942, 2 years later, the war had obviously escalated. She was now taking 15,000 at a time. In fact, in July of 1943, she would set a world record for the most souls in history ever carried aboard a single vessel on a voyage. 16,683 people were on this ship. The payload was so heavy, she sat 4 feet lower in the water. And that is a world record she still holds to this day. No ship in history has ever carried more, probably never will, because it was so incredibly dangerous to do that. But just a sign of dangerous times, World War II being the case. During the war, she would make 72 wartime crossings successfully, transporting right at 900,000 troops. Doesn't mean, even though she was never sank, that there weren't times where people were trying to do that. Hitler realized what an asset this ship and her sister ship that was also serving, Queen Elizabeth, both ships, because of their size and speed, were tremendous assets to the Allied forces. Hitler wanted them gone. So he put a bounty on both ships of $250,000 in 1942, which would be a fortune today, to any U-boat captain who could sink either ship. The Emperor of Japan decided to match that. So $500,000 in 1942 to anyone who could sink either of these 2 ships and take them out of service. No one could, because they were simply too fast. Now, after the war, she would go into a different capacity right before going back into passenger service. She operated what they called the bride and baby shuttle service, taking brides of war from around the world and their children back to North America to be reunited with their GI husbands and fathers. She would take at least 22,000 on those voyages. Before 1967, when she was restored to her former glory and went back into passenger service as an ocean liner. So she would serve from 1947 to 1967, another 20 years as an ocean liner, and still very successful up until the early 1960s, when now you could just hop on a plane and fly across the Atlantic in about 7 hours, versus a very fast ocean liner that still took 4.5 days. So ships like this began to lose money hand over fist. Cunard decided to put the ship up for auction, and she would be sold to the city of Long Beach for $3.45 million. Don't know if you've looked at the housing market in LA, but that's a really nice starter home for you. They bought her with the intention of making her what she is today, which is a floating hotel, museum, and tourist attraction, and popular venue. Now, she would arrive here December 9th, 1967. She left Southampton, England on her last voyage 39 days earlier. Now, it took her 39 days to get here from Southampton to Long Beach because she was 8 feet too wide to go through the Panama Canal. So instead, she had to go all the way around South America. But this was a last voyage fit for a queen. They dubbed it her last great cruise. Everyone on board knew what they were in for kind of what they were in for when they booked that passage. First class cabins were going for $100,000 a piece. It was a sold out voyage, parties every night, but this was a ship built for the North Atlantic. And so, because of that, the only rooms that really had air conditioning were her first class main lounge and first class dining room. The rest of the ship, including this room here, all of your staterooms, corridors, other public rooms, they had a circulation system, but that was it, no air conditioning, because they didn't need it on the North Atlantic. But they left Southampton October 31st, which was fall. But when you travel into the southern hemisphere, it's summer during those months. So she was going along South America when it was very hot, very humid. There were a lot of passengers who actually got off in ports in South America and hopped on planes and flew to Long Beach so they could just watch the ship arrive because they had had enough fun with that voyage, I guess. Now, she would arrive here, as I said, December 9th, 1967. She would open to the public as she sits today as a hotel and convention center. A few years later, it took a few years to convert her. So May of 1971 is when she opened to the public, and she's been here 56 years this December. So now she is a far longer part of Southern California's history than she ever was as a British ocean liner sailing out at sea. Lots of info for you in the first 10 minutes. Any questions about her history before we move on? No? All right. Well, we are going to go into the first class main lounge, so please follow me down this way. The first class main lounge, we now call this the Queen Salon. For the first class area only, well, traveling out to see, it's very famous for this movie from a lot of different movies. So if it does look familiar, it's been used in some old classic movies, The Godfather 2 with Al Pacino, The Natural with Robert Redford. If you've ever heard of the book or the movie, The Poseidon Adventure, have any of you heard of it? Okay, so this room was actually recreated on a soundstage for that movie. If you watch the old movie from the 60s, the room that actually turns upside down on the ship was the recreation of this room. And an interesting story about the Poseidon Adventure, it was actually a fictional story based on a true event. So when this ship was traveling, remember I mentioned that rolling problem that she had? Average wave height on the Atlantic is about 65 feet. So imagine waves coming out of these promenade deck windows here, that's 65 feet above the waterline, hitting the ship on all sides, and she would rock quite severely. Now during World War II, she was actually hit by a wave that was about 90 feet in height, and it actually knocked her 52 degrees on her side, where she sat for a matter of minutes before correcting herself. And it was thought if she would go 55 degrees, she would have capsized. So only 3 more degrees and she would have capsized. Now there was a war correspondent traveling aboard on that voyage, and he was so shaken up by this, everyone was obviously. He went home, was telling some of his writer friends about it. One of them was a novelist who penned the Poseidon Adventure based on what happened on the ship, and it became a best-selling book. They decided to turn it into a movie, and since the story was founded on something that actually happened on the ship, they decided to use this as the backdrop for the movie. So the majority of the movie was shot here aboard our ship, and so this room was recreated for that movie as well. Now, this room is centered around the theme of music. Remember I talked about the speaker system throughout the ship. They would play pre-recorded music through here. If something special was happening on the stage, they would actually broadcast it throughout the ship. And they actually incorporated music into the design scheme of this room. You can look at the etched glass panels around the room, the raised bronze relief sculptures, even that gesso panel over the forward fireplace has undertones that pertain to music. And the reason I talk about music so much, there's an apparition that has been seen in this room a number of times that also seems to always follow music throughout the ship. His the apparition of a woman. She's always dressed in a long white dress, seen dancing in this room and other ballrooms throughout the ship that we call the Lady in White. Now, the Lady in White is a bit of a mystery to us. People often ask us, who is the Lady in White? Can we tie her to one of the deaths that occurred aboard the ship? I should tell you there are 58 reported deaths aboard the ship and 2 births during her voyages out as an ocean liner. But there were a lot of times during her career, for instance, during World War II when she was making all those voyages with 15,000, 16,000 men aboard, or after the war when they had the bride and baby shuttles, they were actually not keeping logs, definitely not accurate logs of all the people on board the ship, and we don't have any records of deaths that occurred during those voyages. We do know that there were deaths that occurred during the World War II voyages, because when you have 15,000 men on a ship traveling through tropical waters with no air conditioning, we do know of men who died of heat exhaustion, different tropical diseases, and they were just buried out at sea with no records remain. So probably many more than the 58 we do know who died aboard the ship. However, the Lady in White, we don't necessarily believe died on this ship. And that brings me to a point I want to make before we get too far into tonight's tour. According to paranormal psychologists or paranormal investigators, the people who obviously study the paranormal for a living, they believe there are 2 different types of hauntings that you might encounter in your life. The first type is what most of us think of when we think of ghosts haunting you. It's something we see in Hollywood movies, and that is what they call an intelligent haunting or a conscious haunting. So that's when a ghost or something that's no longer living makes their presence known to someone who is living for a very specific purpose. They interact with you. And that is one kind of haunting, and we'll talk about some hauntings on the ship that are conscious hauntings. But the Lady in White is actually what they would call residual energy. And the thoughts behind residual energy are this. We are all made up of energy. And that is true. That's not pseudoscience, that's a fact. We are all made up of subatomic particles that are running into each other at such rapid rates we can't see it with our own eyes, but that's what holds us all together as we move throughout the universe. As this event occurs, we cast off energy, so we all emit energy fields around us. And you can all feel that energy because we as humans are empathetic creatures. How many of you have ever said, I don't like the way that person makes me feel? We've all said that because we can feel that. It's a survival instinct that we can feel things before we can actually see them and detect them with our own eyes. So, with this residual energy concept in mind, they believe that whenever we go through our lives, we cast off energy, and sometimes that energy can remain trapped forever, lingering in time and space like a thumbprint in history. And so a lot of these sightings that take place around the Queen Mary, they actually believe are residual energy left behind from people who are long gone. Perhaps they died on the ship, perhaps they didn't. Sometimes it's just a strong emotional connection that was formed in a moment. It can be good, it can be bad. But sometimes you can feel it and sometimes you can see it. So as we're going throughout the ship today, keep an open mind and keep an open eye, because you never know what you might feel or see with your own eyes. So, with that concept in mind, what they actually traditionally believe with the Lady in White, because we'll talk about her in another room as well, is that she was probably one of the war brides traveling aboard the ship during the bride and baby shuttle services. The way those voyages worked were this. Women and their children, if they had them, were given free passage aboard the Queen Mary to come to North America. But in order for them to disembark and pass through immigration, someone had to be waiting there to claim them, to say, yes, this is my wife. Otherwise, they could not pass through immigration. So they had to remain on the ship and were sent back. It's commonly believed she was a war bride who did not have someone waiting to claim her, and she had to remain aboard the ship, and she was sent back. Now, obviously, she probably did not die as a result of this, but she was so distraught that that energy remained trapped on the ship and still remains to this day. People often believe that she's just dancing, trying to soothe her melancholy soul from being left behind. I tend to think she's just waiting for the right man to come along and claim her and take her home. Maybe it's one of you gentlemen. Any questions about the main lounge? No. All right, well, we're going to make our way up to the ship's bridge. We're going to go out these doors to the promenade doors. Last, just let it close behind you on this deck. And each one had access from both the promenade and inside the ship. And this deck was actually 360 degrees all the way around this level. It was a quarter mile from end to end, completely enclosed so the passengers could stroll, run, exercise, while being protected from the waves of the North Atlantic. During the ship's speed trials, which was prior to her maiden voyage, ships always had to undergo 2 different sets of trials. One were their sea trials, where they test the ship's seaworthiness. The other were their speed trials, where they would test the engines to see what she was truly capable of. And the speed trials, excuse me, are a good marketing gimmick for the company. They always invite some high-profile passengers to come aboard to take in the first voyage of the ship and actually buzz some news and generate some buzz, I should say, about the ship. And one of those passengers on her speed trials was a man by the name of Lord Burleigh, who was an Olympic-class sprinter. And he decided he wanted to show everyone just how fast he was. So he came out here onto the promenade deck, ran the entire quarter-mile track all the way around in under 60 seconds. And he did so in a full tuxedo and dress shoes. Yeah. Now, I will also say, I think I could probably do that too. I'm a runner, but this deck no longer goes all the way around uninterrupted, so I guess we'll never know. You just have to take my word for it. Now, this is one of the areas where you're going up a staircase, so whoever is last to go up the staircase, if you will please just move the stanchions back over in place, that would be wonderful.
That's fine.
You don't have to take your time back. All right, all together. Yeah, I think we have some believers in our midst. And that's cool, me too. What these are, there are two distinct ways that paranormal investigators try and determine the presence of spiritual energy in your midst. So EMFs, let me start with EMFs, are spikes in electromagnetic fields. Remember I talked about we all emit energy, and whenever you come into that energy field, you can actually see a spike on an electrometer. And EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena, are sounds. Sometimes they're actual words, but they can be grunts, moans, inanimate object sounds that exist on the frequencies that our ears cannot hear, our human ears cannot hear them, but they can be recorded and captured on electronic devices. So if you do have EMF detectors, EVP recorders, feel free to use those. If you don't, there are apps you can download. I'm not going to say that I think they're incredibly accurate, but a lot of people do like to use them throughout the tours. So I have one I use called Ghost Hunting Tools. It's got a little blue icon with a hand. There's also the Hope Spirit Box, Ghost Tube. These are all free apps that people love to use on these tours. The other reason I use Ghost Hunting Tools, one with a little blue hand, it has both an EVP recorder at the bottom and an EMF detector at the top. And when I looked at the reviews online, there were a lot of reviews, and there were a lot of 5-star reviews, so I thought, you know what, I'll take a chance on it. And I downloaded it, and the day I got it, I've had it for about 2 months now. I went to several places around the ship that I knew there had to be some sort of like energy or something, and I wanted to see what kind of EVPs I could get. And this EVP recorder, it has a bank of built-in words, so when it recognizes an actual word, it will display it in writing. Right now it's detecting the word rent. I don't know what that means. My rent is paid, it's not due. But it will also keep a log of all the words it records. And so I went to several places throughout the ship where I knew the particular event that occurred in that exact spot. And some of the words I got were incredibly accurate. I'm not talking having to grasp at straws accurate, I'm talking exactly what happened in that spot. So that kind of made me a little bit of a believer in the app.
What app is it called?
This is called Ghost Hunting Tools.
Oh.
And what I also think, what confuses some people, they think that every word they hear is probably a ghost talking to them. And I think more so, it's probably just some residual energy that can be lingering. So some of the words you get are more modern words. Some of them are definitively older. You just have to read between the lines sometimes. But I only point that out because some people like to use these tools as they go throughout the tour. So feel free, use them. If you get something cool, share it with the class. It makes the whole tour more fun. Now, we're going to talk about this room that we are now standing in, which is the ship's bridge. Who is in charge of the ship? Does anyone know? The captain. We all know that, right? Captain's in charge of his vessel, but what most people don't realize, the captain's job on a ship like this was actually acting more as a manager and working as the face of the company in more of a PR position. So it would actually be the officers who are up here day in, day out, doing the work that is delegated to them by the captain, while the captain is schmoozing with the first class passengers down below deck. But he would make an appearance up here from time to time throughout the day, I'm sure, more so if there were dangerous weather conditions outside. But on voyages such as the maiden voyage, the captain probably spent quite a bit of time up here. And it's actually the ship's captain I'm going to be talking about from her maiden voyage that is linked to a sighting that we believe is the ship's very first captain. That's right here at these helms Now the reason there are 3 helms on the bridge, these are redundant systems. So there are actually 6 wheels throughout the ship. 6 wheels or helms you can use to pilot the ship. These are just 3. The other 3 are down below decks. Those 2 function exactly. One functions like the other. So if this wheel goes down, you still have a backup in place that can function just like the primary. This is actually a little bit more high-tech. This was an early form of autopilot. They nicknamed it the Iron Mike. And so it could pilot the ship just like those wheels do, but it was tied to the ship's navigation system. That black cauldron looking thing over there is actually a gyroscopic compass, and that would detect true north. They also had magnetic compasses like this one here that would detect magnetic north. They would chart their course based on the variance between the 2 compasses. Now, because this is tied to the gyroscopic compass, what they could actually do is chart the course, and that compass lock this in place, and this wheel doesn't move no matter what, so they can set it and forget it. In theory. Now, they actually rarely did that because remember I talked about those extreme waves that are 65 feet on average above the waterline, not only hitting the sides of the ship, but washing up over the bow and hitting the waves or hitting the windows on the decks below us. If you went into the observation bar tonight, that cocktail lounge down there, that was the first class main cocktail lounge. They would actually have to close that in rough seas because the waves would wash up over the bow and smash against those windows. So this ship has seen some rough waves. And because of that, they rarely use this wheel, at least not in that capacity where they would lock it in, because if the wheel never moves, that's going to make for a very rough ride for everyone aboard. So more times than not, they would choose to have someone standing at the helm, piloting the ship based on what was happening outside with the waves and the weather conditions. So, I mentioned the ship's very first captain. He was a man by the name of Commodore Edgar Britton. He was not old by today's standards, I guess, but at the time he was probably a pretty older man. He was 62 years old when he piloted the Queen Mary on her maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City. And he would serve as her captain for the first 5 years of her career until October 28, 1936. Now, he was staying aboard the ship. It was actually docked in New York, waiting to make its return voyage to Southampton the following day, or that same day. It was the very early morning hours. It was going to leave on October 28th, but he could not be awoken from his sleep in his cabin, which is directly below us. He had suffered a stroke in his sleep. Now, eventually they were able to revive him. They took him off the ship and transported him to a hospital, but he died that very same day. And 3 days later, on Halloween, they would bury him at sea. Now, there has been an apparition seen here, standing at the helm, not only here while the ship has been docked in Long Beach, but even when the ship was still out at sea serving as an ocean liner. And it's commonly believed that is the apparition of the ship's very first captain, Commodore Edgar Britton, still piloting the ship to this very day. Although it doesn't really go anywhere right now except rising and falling with the tide. Any questions about the bridge or anything you might experience up here? These metal tubes up here, these are talking tubes, just like you see on playgrounds today. These are a communication device, one of 3 you would use here on the bridge. Now, these are only good for short distances. So these are all linked to the 2 wing bridges, the docking bridges that hang out there. And then also there's a signal bridge directly above us. And then over here, it's kind of dark in this corner, you can't see it. But there's a tube that comes up through the floor right here. This goes down to the captain's quarters. So you could yell down to the captain to come up to the bridge in a hurry if he needs to. But you might also want to watch what you say about the captain, because he could probably be listening in on all the conversations up on the bridge. And then you also had the phones, the bank of phones behind you. Those were all hardwired phones. So anytime you see a phone on the ship, there's an extension somewhere that is directly hardwired. So you just pick up the phone and it calls automatically. And then these are telegraphs. So if you've ever watched movies like Titanic, it's very easy to assume that what they're doing when they move these back and forth is actually controlling the throttle for the speed of the ship. And I guess that's because they look like the throttle on a smaller boat. But these are actually just communication devices. These are also linked to a counterpart. So anytime you see one of these, there's a counterpart specifically for each unit somewhere else in the ship. So this is one of the 4 propellers, this is one of the 4 propellers, this one, and this one. There are 4 propellers in total. And each one of these has a counterpart down in the engine rooms. So if I want to give a change in orders down to the engine rooms, I come over here, move this back and forth. That's going to signal an alarm bell down in the engine rooms. They can watch the counterpart screen to this one, and I can give an order. There's an arrow on the screen. This green arrow down here, if you can see it, will change based on the command I've given them. They repeat the order back to me, and on my end up here, this green arrow is going to change to show me that they've received my order, and they're now going to carry it out. So it's just a way to mass communicate. And they're also handy because other areas of the ship have one of these that they can actually see two areas communicating with each other, and they can change what they need to do based on what two areas are doing within the ship. All right, well, we're going to go from here down to my first favorite location, which is the officers' quarters and the captain's quarters, directly a deck below us. It is an area that, oh, okay, I'm getting some energy now. It is an area that is rather dark, so if you do have flashlights on your phone, once we start to head down the stairs, you might want to turn those on. There are some lights in there, but it's very dim. This just says everybody. I'm waiting to see if it says what about everybody. So far, nothing. What's that? Oh, Debbie. Debbie. Any Debbie in here?
Sorry.
Sorry? Oh, sorry. Well, it was weird. Probably about a week ago, I was in here and a lot of people had that app open. And as I was talking about Commodore Edgar Britton, someone had the word stroke and someone had sleep and bed. So interesting. Sometimes they are accurate. Sometimes they're, like I said, they're specifically accurate. And we go throughout this tour today, when we go to those locations where I picked up these words, I will tell you, it still blows my mind what I got on some of those. So I will ask you guys to head out those doors right there. I'm going to start locking up from in here. I'll meet you outside. If anybody wants to do it.
I'm coming.
The two rooms you see over there in the corner, the one directly in the corner is the captain's sleeping quarters. The room here in the middle was the captain's day room, or a parlor where he would entertain either some of the other officers or even first-class passengers he might invite up to entertain them in his cabin here. This room right here was the staff captain's quarters, and this is the room I'm going to be specifically talking about while we're here, because we do know of an incident that took place in this very room in 1949 with one of the ship's officers. The ship's senior second officer, William Stark, was invited by the staff captain to come to the staff captain's quarters for a pre-dinner drink after the end of his watch. This is something officers routinely do even to this day, and Stark said, you know what, I would love to. So at the end of his watch, he showed up at the staff captain's quarters. He was the first to arrive on the scene. The staff captain and the other officers were a few minutes behind him. Now while he was waiting, Stark decided, you know what, I'm going to get my pregame on a little bit early. So he asked the cabin steward to go and fetch him a bottle of gin. Now I always make this distinction to let you know these cabin stewards were generally very young boys, around 11 or 12 years old when they first started their career out at sea. So the young boy goes off in search of, oh my gosh, this might not be important, but we're down in the captain's quarters, right? And I talked about how Commodore Edgar Britton, the ship's first captain, died of a stroke. He passed away the same day, but he suffered a stroke in his sleep, and I just got the word stroke while we're down here. Interesting. So anyway, back to what I was talking about, Senior Second Officer William Stark. He was waiting on that bottle of gin. The cabin steward comes back and presents him with a bottle that is labeled gin. Now Stark, having no reason to believe otherwise, pours himself a very healthy glass and adds a lime twist and shoots it back. Now we do know, because of the report, that Stark was suffering from a very severe cold at the time, so he could not smell very well. But he knew as soon as he swallowed what was in that glass that it was not gin. Around that time, the other officers arrived on the scene and noticed a strange expression on Stark's face. So they asked him, what's the matter? He said, well, gentlemen, he laughed rather nervously, trying to play off the matter, said, I do believe I've just poisoned myself. But he didn't realize just how accurate those words were. It wasn't gin in that bottle that was labeled gin. It was actually carbon tetrachloride, which is an industrial cleaning agent they would use to dry clean their uniforms. Now, the rest of the night, he tried to put the matter out of his mind. Why? I don't know, because the ship had a full functioning hospital. He could have gone to seek treatment that same night, but he perhaps thought it wasn't really that big of a deal. So he went about the rest of the night as if nothing had happened. But he woke up the next morning feeling incredibly ill. Now he had no choice. He was taken to the ship's hospital, but he continued to decline through the day. The next day the ship docked, he was transferred to a hospital where he later died. Now, Ever since then, even while the ship was still traveling out at sea as an ocean liner, there have been numerous reports of an officer wandering around the officers' quarters around these decks just outside that is believed to be Senior Second Officer William Stark, perhaps just wandering around looking for the right bottle. Now, he's not only seen here, but believe it or not, 2 decks below us on the A-deck landing where there are restrooms at the bottom of the third-class stairwell, he's seen wandering around the women's restroom. We get a lot of reports from our female housekeepers and the front desk staff who use those restrooms, and you might be wondering, why is he in a woman's restroom? Isn't that kind of odd? Well, when the ship was still sailing out at sea as an ocean liner, those restrooms did exist, but they were reversed to the order that they are now. So in his mind, he is in the men's restroom, and he's probably wondering why there are a lot of ladies in that room. Now,
I just got why as well.
oh, hi, oh. Well, I guess if he's listening, now he knows. The reason I make that distinction about the young cabin stewards, so they were only 11 or 12 years old typically, the cabin steward probably didn't have a key to actually open a liquor cabinet. So he went off in search of a locker that he could open, and he found this bottle in a foot locker. So that's probably why he had a bottle that was not actually gin. Why it was labeled as gin, I don't know. It's probably a practical joke. But it is kind of neat to think about those cabin stewards were so young because the ship's very first captain that we've talked about twice now, Commodore Edgar Britton, started his career as a cabin boy at 11 years old and worked his way up to ship's captain before he passed away. Those cabin boys were actually, they would have a lot of fun. Now, back in those days, their parents were probably very poor, so they actually went off to earn money to help pay their way through their family. And they got to see the world in doing so, though, and they got to meet a lot of interesting people. Part of their daily life was they would go up to the sun deck, right here where the lifeboats are. They would be inspected every single morning by the chief steward. They would have to present their uniforms, stick out their hands. He would look at their fingernails, make sure they were all clean and presentable, ready for passengers to see them. And then they began their day with an hour in the gymnasium burning off energy. And then at the end of the night, before they went to bed, they would have another hour in the ship's swimming pool, the first-class swimming pool, swimming while there were still passengers in there. And if any of you remember those old black and white movies, the Tarzan movies, Johnny Weissmuller was the actor who played Tarzan in those old movies, and he traveled several times aboard the ship. There's photographs of him swimming in the pool with all those cabin boys burning off all that energy. I guess he was a big kid himself. Any questions about the officers' quarters, the captain's quarters, or anything down here?
I've got a bunch of words down.
Oh, what'd you get?
We got ecological, pen, shoot, and self-esteem.
I just got the word return.
I got quiet.
Quiet?
Guess we're making too much noise.
Oh, you know what? A lot of times when I'm talking, people keep telling me they get the words yell, scream. I guess the ghosts are mad because I talk, but I do project. I try to project.
Quiet down.
Yeah, right?
It wants Gabriella's number.
All right, well, we will make our way back out to the deck. In the 80s, when the ship was floating here as it does today, serving as a hotel, and this room would have looked identical to the way it does now in the 1980s. Now, this room was reserved for a private event, and 2 members of our housekeeping staff came into this room to begin setting up tables for the event that was going to take place the following day. When they entered this room, which was closed off, they found a lady sitting in a wicker chair over there in the middle of the dance floor. Now, according to the report, the woman had dark brown hair, she was wearing a floor-length red formal evening gown, and she was just sitting there, staring straight ahead. Now, you might ask yourself, didn't this freak the housekeepers out to find someone dressed in period clothing in this room? The short answer is no. We see people all the time wearing period clothing coming aboard the ship, taking in the ambiance of an old ocean liner, and so that didn't take them by surprise. And it also didn't surprise them to see a woman in the room in which she had no business being, because believe it or not, we see people each and every day sneaking into places they're not supposed to be. But the woman wasn't bothering anybody, so they thought, you know what, we'll just let her sit over there. She'll probably get up and leave of her own accord when she sees us working on this side of the room. So that's what they did. They started setting up tables over here. A few moments later, their manager comes in. She also spots the woman over there. She asks the 2 housekeepers, who is she and what's she doing in here? They said, well, we don't know. We didn't talk to her, but she wasn't bothering us. So the manager is not feeling quite so generous. She goes over to have a word with the lady. She says, ma'am, this room is closed for a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to get up and leave. But the woman does not acknowledge the manager. She doesn't even do anything but keep staring straight ahead, as if no one else is in the room. The manager's a little miffed by this. She escalates the situation and the conversation. She says, ma'am, if you do not agree to get up and leave right now, I am going to call security and have you escorted out of the room and off the ship. Still, the lady just keeps staring straight ahead. So true to her word, Manager goes over, grabs her radio, goes to call for security. As soon as she starts talking into the radio, the lady stands up from the chair. She takes one sweeping glance around the room, and then both she and the chair she had been sitting in vanish into thin air. Now, all three women filed a report that day. All of their details match up exactly, meaning that this apparition was visible for at least 10 minutes. But that also makes this apparition the longest reported sighting anywhere aboard the ship, and it took place in this very room over in that corner. Now, this is one of the places where, as a group, we're going to go ahead and stand up. And I'll give you about 2-3 minutes, wander around this room, take some pictures, ask some questions. There are photographs in these cases of what the room originally looked like when it was sailing out at sea. I'll be lingering over by the doors if you have any questions. What's on the 10th floor? There you go. Yeah. What is her birthday?
December 2nd, 1981.
Okay, of course you know. I was like, well, maybe her birthday's May 18th, and they were trying to do a photo.
Yeah, right?
Stay there.
By definition, they weren't grand staircases because they were so opulent. They were grand because they went through so many decks for passenger access. The Queen Mary chose not to have a grand staircase because she had so many elevators. They wanted to capitalize that and showcase that. She had 24 elevators for passenger use. Of the 24, 22 of them were all identical in their cars and their systems and components, so that if any one went down while the ship was out at sea, they could take parts off of one to repair another one and keep the other elevators going. Now, over the years, they've become obsolete. They don't manufacture those cars or systems anymore. So we've had to do the same thing while the ship has been sitting here all these years. And now, of the 24, we only have 2 that still work. They're the 2 over there in the far corner. These are just empty shafts right here. And some of ours that are employee elevators, there's one that was a second-class elevator that we use as employees, and that doesn't work half the time. It's stuck on A deck half the time with this door open and the alarm going off. I'm scared to go in there.
Is somebody trying to pull it open?
Oh, they're trying to pull it open?
No, it's cracked. That's why.
If you look up,
You can see the shaft in there.
yeah, but if you look up, it looks like somebody's staring at you.
Oh, yeah, right there.
All right.
Well, speaking of creepy things, we're going to talk about this piano, which isn't see me anytime they want. Third-class passengers, they paid for the trip of a lifetime. I want to give them something to remember. So he played a free concert for them. Now, this piano, even though it has not been played by human hands for a number of years, it still seems to play from time to time. Sometimes the front desk will report hearing soft notes being played when no one's around. Sometimes guests staying on the A deck level will call the front desk 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, asking them to please tell the pianist to tone it down a little bit because they're trying to sleep. They inform them, no one's played this, but it still seems to play to this day. And perhaps that's because there is an apparition that seems to be tied to this piano. I do want to make clear, it is not the ghost of Liberace that plays this piano. Though there is probably still some glitter and feathers left behind from when he played. The apparition that seems to follow this piano is the lady we talked about in the very first location, the lady in white. Remember, she seems to be tied to areas around the ship with music, and she seems to have a special connection to this piano. So, as this piano makes its way throughout the ship, moving from one location to the next, usually she's seen shortly thereafter. She seems to follow this piano. So maybe if they move it from here to another place, we'll see her again. And I live in Hollywood, so I have a drive to get home, and then I have to be back. It takes me, when I leave Hollywood to get here, I have to leave 2 hours. I'm
spot, Barry.
Hospital was located down below the main dining room, next to the freezers where they could have the ice cream, because if someone were to be deceased on the ship, they would put the body in the ice cream to preserve them until the ship docked. That's still something they do to this day, believe it or not. If you watch the news, there was a ship that was part of the Celebrity Cruise line out about a month ago, and someone on the ship passed away. Their family was traveling with them, but the person's body was put into a refrigerator, not a freezer. So by the time the ship arrived in port, the body had decomposed to a point they couldn't use it, and the family actually sued the cruise line because of that. So it still happens. Now also, you got to think this ship took to the seas in the 1930s, right after, tuberculosis was a big thing in the early 1900s and well into the 20s. So if people were known to have some sort of infectious disease, they would be brought back here to keep them isolated and away from everyone else. This is also where stowaways were kept. If they found a stowaway on board, they would keep them back in the isolation wing of the ship as well and sent back on a return voyage. Whenever the ship had docked in New York, security was making their sweep to make sure all passengers had disembarked, and he was found deceased in the bed of B-340. And ever since then, there have been numerous sightings of paranormal activity in B-340, even while the ship was still out at sea. One female passenger was traveling alone in the 1960s, and she was awakened in the middle of the night when her covers were yanked off of her while she was sleeping. So this woke her up. She kind of just groggily pulled the covers back, but they kept being yanked back off of her. She sits up in the bed and sees the shadow of a man standing at the foot of her bed, looking right at her. She lets out a blood-curdling scream, as you do. That alerts the cabin steward, who is on watch in the corridor, and he comes running and lets himself into B-340. He asks her, "What's the matter?" And she's explaining what she's just witnessed. He said, "Well, as soon as you screamed, I saw your door. No one's come out of the room, and there's no one in here but the two of us now." Now, over the years, while the ship was still traveling at sea, people would report their portholes opening and slamming shut by themselves, which if you've ever opened any of these portholes, they're very heavy. They're hard to open, and to slam them shut, it takes a lot of force. So it's not just the wind that could do that. People hear strange knocking on the walls and the doors when no one's around. Disembodied whispers, people waking them up in the middle of the night by either shaking their bed, whispering into their ear, or pulling the covers off of them. Someone actually reported being woken in the middle of the night and seeing a man sitting in a chair next to the bed, smoking a cigar with a briefcase and a newspaper on the table right next to the bed when no one else was in the room. Now, over the years, because the reports had grown so out there, I forgot to mention one of our housekeepers. Yes, the last reported sighting that took place there was in the 1990s. And the ship was now floating here at a hotel. A housekeeper is in the bed at B-340. She goes out to grab some fresh towels off of her cart. She goes back in to find all of the bedding from the bed she's just made laying in a heap in the middle of the floor. So that was kind of the one that broke the camel's back. They decided, you know what, we're just going to take this hotel room off the registry, we're going to strip it bare, and we're just going to use it for storage. So for 3 decades, that room sat vacant. They were just using it for storage, and from time to time, they would use it for an accounting office. Do you think that stopped the paranormal activity? No. Now you have employees that refuse to go anywhere near that room. That's why the accounting office never stayed for too long. They would keep saying, we can't work under these conditions, and they would move it somewhere else. So it wasn't until 2018 they decided, you know what, we're missing out on an opportunity to make a lot of money here. Because a lot of people still know about the legend of B-340. They want to stay in there, so we're just going to give them what they want. We're going to remodel it back into a hotel room, market the heck out of it, charge $1,000 a night, and see if people stay in there. So they did. They gave it a makeover, made it a mini suite, equipped with a Ouija board and the instructions to Bloody Mary next to the bathroom mirror. And they charged that $1,000 a night, and they had a guest list, people waiting for 3 months to stay in that room. The first people to stay in there called the front desk around midnight, and they were laughing, having a great time. They were elated. They said, we've had a lot of fun here tonight, but you can go ahead and just cut it with the special effects. We're ready to just go to bed. The front desk told them, we do not have a budget for special effects. Anything you're experiencing is nothing that we're doing. And they actually checked out at 2 a.m. They got their money's worth at that point. And they're not the only ones. A lot of people don't make it all the way through the night. Some do, but a lot don't. Including Shane and Colby. They've stayed here probably about 5 or 6 times, and sometimes they make it through the night, sometimes they don't. So we're going to head over to B-340 right now and see if we can figure out what's going on over there. And I will tell you, before we head over there, can you guys keep a secret? So that is a room that on these tours, we normally just go outside the room. We'll stand out in the hallway and people ask questions to the door or whatever, because not all the tour guides have access to it. But about 2 nights ago, I walked up to the front desk and said, can we take people into B-340? And the first thing they asked was, well, who's leading the tour? And I said, well, tonight there's 2 paranormal tours. I'm leading one, Josh is leading the other one. They said, well, we don't trust all the tour guides, but we'll give you a key to get in there. So we have a key to get in B-340, thanks to me. And you guys, just don't tell anybody that we're going to go in there. All of this way.
Yeah, just red.
Call him first.
You know, girlfriend, you got the camera.
Thank you.
You got the camera.
Was it dark? Did they turn on the lights in the hallway? Because when we came down here, it was pitch like dark.
Oh, I don't know.
It was like super dim.
I did my walkthrough about 7:30 and the lights were already out.
No, they were. What time did we come down here? About 7? What was I?
Oh,
I don't even know where my husband is.
weird.
Yeah, it was super dark. We were freaking out.
B normally stays pretty dark, and B is the only passenger hallway that has no exterior entrance.
Yeah, it
There's
was
no natural
really
light
dark.
through.
It was really dark in the hallways. Right now it's lit up. Yeah.
Oh, question. No, maybe when we came into our room, they don't leave the TV and the lights on.
It depends.
Because the TV was running like that.
Like it was on and then the lights were on and
Like when you came into the room?
Just the bed lights.
right when we checked out, we haven't even been there yet.
Oh, okay.
We just
I mean, a
walked
lot of
through.
times they do that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I was a flight attendant for 3 years right before I came here, and most hotels you check into, they'll have a screen with your name on it that says "Welcome to the whatever."
Oh, well,
Yeah.
we're missing out. I guess we have to stay more places. Okay.
Now in here, there is that Ouija board over there. So I turn this light down. Now, I will tell a story that happened. Someone asked about a stabbing. Oh yeah, we are in a bedroom. Let me show you something that happened though. The other night, the first night we came in here, we had some people that had some equipment in here. They didn't know they were going to go in B-340. They were hoping they would. And so it was my first time to get to bring people in here. And this guy had an EMF detector. He decided to lay it on the bed. And the whole night he had been using it. You know, it goes up to the red zone whenever there's, a high spike in energy. And he said the whole night he had been getting, momentary blips on the red side, but it usually just stayed down in the green and went up to yellow. And so he was like, everyone, take a look at this. He held up his EMF detector, and then he put it down on the bed, and it was red nonstop. And I kid you not, I didn't take out my phone immediately because I was like, I'm not going to video what's going on our tour, but I finally couldn't stand it anymore. This is how long the thing... I had to take a video. It went off for 5 solid minutes. We thought it was actually stuck, and then it would turn off and then turn back on again. The whole time we were in here talking about the events that we think are tied to this room. There's a lot of energy in this room. Now people wonder, why is so much energy in this room? And someone mentioned a stabbing earlier. They were asking me about a stabbing. There are rumors of a murder that took place aboard the ship. We don't have any records of a murder that took place aboard the ship. We do know of a death that occurred in connection with the ship that we think has actually led to a manifestation of a haunting that happens on the ship quite frequently. So there was a woman staying in B-340. She was an older woman who had an adult son who was married with 2 daughters. She was staying in this room and she received a phone call. And this was as the ship was floating as it does today as a hotel. So she was a hotel guest. And she received a phone call that her son had been murdered by his wife. His wife went crazy. She killed him. Then her 2 daughters who had witnessed it, her 2 young daughters, she killed both of them before committing suicide. So she found out her whole family had passed away while she was in this room. One of those little girls was named Dana. Ever since then, that energy has somehow seemed to have made its way onto the ship and manifest itself from time to time as a little girl named Dana that seems to wander the hallways around the ship. People have reported seeing her, some people have said they've spoken to her, and she calls herself Dana. So it's believed to be in connection with what the news was that was delivered to the guest staying in this room all those years ago. Now also, when this ship was traveling during World War II as a troop transport ship, we are very close to the bow of the ship. So the staircase we were just at, right, you probably saw there's an old elevator up there. Right on the other side of that elevator, that's the cargo holds and the forward end of the ship. So there's, right up there, was the site of a horrific accident in 1942. The ship was traveling off the coast of Ireland, and again, her speed was her biggest asset, right, during the war, but she also traveled in that serpentine pattern, zigzagging course every 10 miles or so, just in case a U-boat was in her vicinity. But when she was getting into port, or when she was leaving port and going out to open waters, getting up to full speed, she would travel with a small fleet of escort cruisers, just as an added layer of protection around her. But once she was in open waters, she traveled alone because she was too fast for anyone to keep up with her. But 1942, off the coast of Ireland, she is traveling with a small fleet of cruisers, getting her safely out to open waters. One of them is the HMS Curacao. This is a small 5,000-ton cruiser with 439 men on board. Now, the Curacao knows about the zigzag pattern the Queen Mary takes, so we have no idea why this happened, but for whatever reason, the HMS Curacao drifted directly into the path of the Queen Mary when she was traveling at near top speed, so about 35 miles per hour. She slices through the Curacao like a knife through butter, cuts the ship in two. Both halves of the Curacao catch on fire within 30 seconds. Within less than a minute, both halves are lost under the Atlantic Ocean. Now, when that happened, 338 men lost their lives almost instantly. If they weren't killed by the actual intersection of the Queen Mary's bow, they were actually cast into the sea. Many of them died of inhaling the fumes from the fuel that spilled out on the surface of the ocean. The rest were pulled alongside the Queen Mary, cut under the ship's propellers, sucked under and cut up under the ship's propellers. So there's a lot of concentrated residual energy at the bow and the ship's propellers. Both places have been the site of numerous recorded visual hauntings, but also recordings, EVPs, the sounds of twisted metal, screaming men, crying for their lives, pain and anguish. So both locations, and the reason I mentioned that up here is because we are so close to the bow, it could be some of that residual energy spilling into this room. I think there's just a lot of different incidents tied to this section of the ship, and it seems to manifest itself in this room. Some people think it's because of the Ouija board. We just don't know. I had a lot of red when I was saying that, and it's all gone down now. Any questions about anything up here in the forward part of B deck? Anything we have or haven't talked about yet? No, you guys just saved them all for the end. That's okay too. All right, well, we'll make our way back out of here. If you haven't got to CB, you can hang around here for a second. The rest of you that have, if you want to make your way out to the stairwell, we're going to make our way down to the ship's pool here in just a second.
Does the bed usually stay like this, or is it just?
No, they're working on getting all of B deck up and running again for the hotel.
Okay.
So this is the last deck they haven't started booking.
So it's gonna be that expensive? Like $1,000?
I don't know yet. I would assume so, just because of demand more than anything. So many people want to stay in this, it kind of just makes sense to charge so much money.
I thought it was 500 at one point. Now, did it go up to 1,000?
1,000's all I know of.
Wow.
Now there might be times during usually September's the slowest month for tourism, and school starts back up, so they might offer cheap rates during a weekday in September.
Okay.
The last one was not.
I don't know. I think you just look down and see what we're involved in. So the area we're sitting in right now used to be a bunch of third-class cabins and corridors. Now it's all been removed. A lot that's changed since the ship came here. Most of first class is still intact and original, but second and third class have been cut up quite a bit. Third class still has most of the public rooms, but second class, unfortunately, there are only 1 or 2 public rooms that still exist from second class. The rest has all just been made over to different attraction areas. Now, right here behind me, these windows look down into what used to be the boiler room. The ship had 5 boiler rooms, 27 boiler rooms total, 2 engine rooms. Now, 1 engine room is still intact. We're going to go there after we leave the pool. But whenever the ship came here in 1967, part of the agreement with our City Long Beach is that would bring her here on that 39-day voyage, and she would never be able to sail again under her own power. They didn't want any cruise line to buy her up for her to become a rival to their company. So to immobilize her, they cut up and removed all 27 boilers in the forward up to the smokestack back. Now there's this big cabin space. Also in doing that, it removed all the structural supports underneath the first class pool. So that pool hasn't been used since the 1960s, the last voyage would have been 1967. But ever since it came here, they drained the pool, and it has not seen water since then. Part of the reason, I think they originally wanted to use that as the pool for the hotel guests, but California State Code says that no pool can be deeper than 3.5 feet at the shallow end, and this is 6 feet deep at the shallow end. The deep end is 12 foot, but I think that's because the rolling the ship did, they wouldn't fill it quite all the way to the top, so there was room for the water to slosh around and not actually exit the pool. We're going to make our way down here to the side cutout of the pool, following this way. Now this was the first class pool. There was a second class pool as well. There was no third class pool. So up until World War II, that was fine. Most third class passengers didn't expect amenities like a pool to be used at their disposal. If you guys want to come down this way a little bit, let some others look in there. But after the war, they actually decided they wanted to rebrand third class from the bottom up. They wanted to remove any stigma that might be associated with traveling in third class. So what they did was they actually renamed the classes. If you look at the Queen Mary's configuration before the war, the classes were called cabin class, which was first class, tourist class was second, and third class, which was called third class. But after the war, the economy was doing quite well. More people had the disposable income to be able to travel. And so to encourage them to do so, they actually called the classes first class, cabin class, and tourist class. They removed third class from the vernacular. They started offering them some more amenities, one of them being the usage of the first class pool for 1 hour every day while the first class passengers were at high tea. And it was chosen to use the first class pool because it was closer in proximity to the third class section. Second class was all the way aft. It didn't make sense to use their pool. So every day, high tea would be from 2 to 4, and the various lounges in first class. So from 2 to 3, third class passengers could swim in that pool. Now you might be asking yourself, why could they only swim for an hour if high tea was for 2 hours? And I'm glad you asked. That is because at 3 o'clock they were ushered out of the pool, so the pool could be drained, scrubbed clean, and refilled with fresh water. So the first class passengers didn't have to worry about any of those nasty third class cooties getting over. True story, I wish I could say I was making it up. Now, the pool is one of the most popular rooms, if not the most popular room on the ship for paranormal investigators, mediums, psychics, people like Zach Bagans and your favorite paranormal YouTubers, for a number of reasons. Most notably, people believe that this room in particular is an actual portal of spiritual energy, a whirlpool, a vortex, where energy can transfer between realms. The reason they think it exists in the pool, there's 2 reasons. Because the ceiling of the pool and the changing rooms, the level we're on just right on the other side of this wall, or where the changing stalls are, they're made of quartzite, and we sit on water. So we're surrounded by water, we have quartzite, both are known conduits for spiritual energy. So they believe that is what's opened up the portal here, specifically in the changing rooms is where they believe the portal exists, but it manifests spirits in the pool regularly. The most commonly seen spirit, the most popular spirit anywhere aboard the ship is actually a little girl that some of you have probably heard of. It goes by the name of Jackie. She's always described as between 5 and 7 years old, and she's seen most often in the ship's pool. Now the reason she's the most famous is because she is seen quite frequently by people. She's captured a lot on camera. She likes to play hide and go seek with people. She looks over the railing, she'll be peeking around columns. She'll be felt quite frequently as well. She'll like to grab onto people's hands, tug at their clothing. She seems to be a very fun-loving, childlike spirit. And she is of course heard, probably more than any other spirit. Paranormal investigators believe that she likes the sound of her voice with the acoustics in the pool, so she's usually heard singing songs to herself. Usually child's nursery rhymes, Mary Had a Little Lamb and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star seem to be her favorites. Because of this, whenever they come and conduct EVP recording sessions, overnight sessions in the pool, they often choose to employ a call and response method. They will sing a song that she's known to sing, but leave out key words and wait for her to fill those words in with the appropriate word, which she routinely does. Now, I do like to say, when Zach Bagans came with his team, they did have a session in the pool overnight. That's just what they chose to do. one of the tour guides who was leading them on the tour was a skeptic. He was not really a fan of the paranormal, but he was doing it as his job to take them overnight into the pool. And they were singing the song, waiting for Jackie to sing, and this tour guide heard with his own ears inside the pool a little girl's voice fill in the words of the song. And he became a believer after that. So she's also believed to be, believe it or not, the most powerful spirit anywhere aboard the ship, because she's the only one that we know who manifests not only on the ship, but off the ship as well. If you saw that great big dome next to the Queen Mary, that was built to house the Spruce Goose, which was Howard Hughes' big prototype plane. If you watch the movie The Aviator with Leonardo DiCaprio that was about Howard Hughes and his big plane, they filmed a lot of it here on the ship, the observation bar in particular. Now, it was part of the same attraction, so up until 1993 when the plane went off to Manville, Oregon, it's no longer part of our attraction anymore. But up until that time, whoever was on security detail for the Queen Mary would do a sweep of both properties every night. So when they left the Queen Mary, they would go over and do a sweep of the dome. The security guard in the 1990s had just left the Queen Mary, went over to do a sweep of the Spruce Goose, and he looked up and saw a little girl matching Jackie's description walking along the wings of the plane. Now, of course, he called out to her that she needed to get down from there, and he said that she jumped off the wings of the plane and disappeared right before she hit the ground. And that's when he knew he had seen Jackie. Behind you, if you don't mind, just we don't have any unexpected visitors here that are of the living, of course. All right, we're going to make our way down to the engine room. Feel free to check out pictures as we're going down. There's photographs going to be constructed. Also, a little bit of info, if you didn't know, back in the days of black and white photography, ships were such a big deal, especially at the time they were launched. If it was the first ship of its class, they would actually pay to have it painted white, the hull painted white, so it photographed better for the launch photo. And then once it was actually floating in the water, they would paint glass. It was an added expense, but they did it for publicity. Here is the lovely Queen Mary, who was Mary of Attack at the time of the launching. She looks quite happy, doesn't she? There's the ship arriving in New York on its maiden voyage. Here's the ship winning the Blue Brabant for its second time. The crossing where it crossed the Atlantic in 3 days, 3 hours, and 18 minutes. These are photographs when she had thousands of troops on board. We don't know if these are actually the photos of the 16,683, but you can tell there are a lot on that ship. Also, anytime you see photographs of celebrities on this ship, those photographs were taken on board this ship. So you have people like Lou Costello, Dave West, Alfred Hitchcock, Cary Grant, Clark Gable was also on there.
It's a bilge.
This?
Now we're down here below decks, and this is actually what we call shaft alley. So these are the propeller shafts that are attached to the propellers on the outside of the ship. This is the inboard propeller, the outboard propellers over there. Then there were two on the other side of this bulkhead right here. So 4 propellers in total. Each one has their own engine. So this is the aft engine room. There was a forward engine room with all the same components. They were turbine-driven engines, quadruple expansion. So a series of four turbines made out of each engine. These shafts were actually incredibly long. The outboards, because they went to the forward engine room, were longer. They were 243 feet in length. The inners are 227 feet in length. They had 11 inches of hollow space at the center of the shaft for heat to dissipate, and also they would warp from beginning to end as they spun through their time out at sea. They could actually work a total of 180 degrees from end to end. You would notice it because it's over the course of the entire shaft itself, but it went through quite a bit of stress as they were turning and moving the ship through the seas at those tremendous speeds. But I'm actually going to talk about that door right there that you guys are standing in the doorway. It's a little bit misleading because the doorway was not originally that tall. If you look, ma'am, where you were standing there with your back to the door, the gear right above your head, that is the top of the door right there. So the doorway has been enlarged to help facilitate bringing tours through here. But the door was actually just that tall originally. You would have had to stoop to go through there. At least most of us would. Now, the incident I want to talk about took place while the ship was still traveling out at sea in 1966, so about a year before she was decommissioned. She was traveling in the very early morning hours. It was about 3 a.m. July 10, 1966. The ship was traveling through a very dense patch of fog, and it was protocol. Anytime the ship was traveling through unsafe conditions, they would order the watertight doors to be closed. Just in the event of a hull breach, everything's already sealed off, and these bulkheads would be watertight as a preventative measure. Now, for this to happen, up on the bridge, the captain would flip a switch or order a switch to be flipped, an electronic switch, and down below decks, all of the alarms would start going off. It would take 35 seconds from the time that the switch was flipped until these doors would actually close. It took that much time for the hydraulic pressure to build up in the cylinders that would close these big 2-ton doors. It was 700 pounds of pressure per square inch. It would build up in those cylinders, and once these doors start moving, they go from fully open to fully closed in a matter of 6 seconds. So as soon as you hear those alarm bells, just get out of the way because the door is going to win every time, even if you're in the middle of that doorway. But as this is happening, the captain's watching the indicator panel up on the bridge with a light that illuminates for each corresponding door. Of the 39 doors, each one lights up when it's successfully sealed off and closed. Everyone is closing as it's supposed to, except for number 13. Why is it number 13? I don't know, it just is. It worked out that way. 13 is flashing on his indicator panel, and that means it's not sealed. So he sends the chief engineers down below decks to find out why the door is not sealing properly. When the chief engineer comes down here, he's met with a very horrific sight right there at door number 13, the doorway right there. There's a young engineer who was caught in door 13 about halfway through. He's been crushed to death. According to the report that was filed, he did suffer severe trauma to his face and his head. His body was wedged in the door with his arms down his sides like this, pinned to the door, and his wrench laying next to him. He was unresponsive, no eye movement. They figured he was dead when they arrived, but they did remove him and take him to the ship's hospital where he was pronounced dead on arrival. Now, he was a very young man. He was only 18 years old on his 5th voyage with the Queen Mary. Of course, we do know his name. The family has actually come on this tour and asked us not to say his name out of respect to the family, but you can find that information out online. But people wonder, why was he in this door to begin with? And that is a mystery. No one reported seeing him in this doorway, and there were no eyewitnesses who said why he was in the doorway. And there are about 3 different theories we've been able to come up with as to why he might have been there. The first is that he was playing chicken with the door. It sounds funny, but on a normal day down below decks, they would have 4-hour shifts, 4 hours on, 8 hours off. And a normal day at sea, there's not much for them to do. They would make up games to pass the time, and one of them was chicken. Anytime these door alarms were going off, they might start hopping through these doorways as many times as possible until the door closed. Whoever got the highest count was the winner. That's a possibility. The second, and probably more likely, is that he dropped the tool and went back to retrieve it. Remember, his wrench was found laying next to him. Now, this would have been during a time when engineers were responsible for buying and maintaining their own tools. So if he dropped something, he would have went back for it and perhaps misjudged how much time he had before that door closed. That's one possibility. The third, and the darkest possibility, is that he was not there accidentally, but put there on purpose. This was during a seafarers' strike. And remember, I mentioned he was only 18 years old on his 5th voyage. It's probably very likely the only way he got the job was by crossing a picket line and taking a job from a striking worker. And some of the other engineers working down below decks with more seniority than him might have placed him here as a matter of poetic justice. We don't know. But ever since then, there have been a number of reported sightings down here at door number 13. Shadow figures, most notably, hopping over the railing. People have reported hearing strange whispers, the sounds of metal banging down here. And I do mention that because you know that red desk that was right beside the doors that we all entered from the gangway? So during the daytime, we'll have someone sitting at that desk. Sometimes it's me on the nights that I do these tours. They'll give me that. It's an easy shift to do during the day to just sit there and tell people where to go. And people will come up from the engine rooms and say, hey, it sounds like somebody had a hammer or a wrench or something. They were banging on something like this. What is that? And I've heard it down here too. They think what happened when he was pinned in the door, he had his wrench in his hand and was probably banging on the door to get someone's attention. He was down there so they would come and rescue him until he suffocated and dropped his wrench. So it seems likely that it happened. People also say that their hair is pulled from time to time down here. And this could be the case because it's usually women who say that their hair is pulled. And up until the 1970s, women were not allowed down in engine rooms or anywhere where there was a lot of machinery because it's deemed unsafe. So perhaps it's this way of telling you that you don't belong down here. We don't know. But anyway, this is one of those places, if you are a hotel guest, I would say come back tomorrow at a time when not a lot of people are down here and just see what you want to get down here in this door. This is the last place I want to tell you that I took my app when I first got it. The day I got it, I was like, I'm coming to door 13 because there's a lot of recording activity down here. And I heard that banging down here, so I wanted to see what it was. And so I came down here, of course, I instantly started getting a lot of red lines on my app. But the three words I got, the first word was victim, the second word was head, which was a victim for trauma to his head, and the third word was crescent, as in crescent wrench, which was lying next to him. Now, I did have a Brit, just for your understanding, tell me that we call them monkey wrenches, and I get that, but there are two different kinds of wrenches that an engineer would use. A monkey wrench and a crescent wrench are not the same wrench. It has to do with the angle of the head and position of the drive shaft. So they would use either or. Now, does this mean it's 10 down here at the door? I don't know. But I thought it was too irrefutable to say that it's not a strange coincidence that those three words line up exactly with them. Any questions about door number 13 or this area? All right. Now, we're not supposed to, just in case I tell you what, are you recording right now? Me? Yeah. No? Anybody recording?
I am. Let me try it.
And if you'll just imagine this thing turning 3 times every second, that's how fast it will be turning when the ship is traveling across the sea. Now remember the incident I talked about with HMS Curacao during World War II. This is an area that paranormal investigators believe is a high concentration of residual energy because of the men that would have met their demise back there. Do we have any questions about anything that we have or have not covered on tonight's recording? All right, well, we're going to head back out the main doors.
Yeah.
What's that?
She got rest on my guess.
Oh, rest. Oh, I just got David. Maybe David needs to rest. I don't know. We're going to go out those doors. Now, remember the ship is rising with the tide, so as soon as you go out those doors, the gangway, there's probably going to be a gap from the gangway lip rising up, so just make sure and watch your step as you go out the doors, out onto the gangway.
Oh, wow, it's okay. I think this is closed. I think this is closed. Okay, come on. Before we get left.
Watch.
I know. Close the door? Did you say close it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, guys, this does conclude Paranormal Shipwalk. I hope you had fun. I hope that you've gotten to see and feel some things tonight. I do leave this tour with a little bit of an opening spiel that it is not my intention nor the intention of this tour to convince you that ghosts are real, the paranormal exists, or that the Queen Mary is haunted. Instead, what we want to do is to take you throughout the ship, share some of the encounters that we've had, and then you can form your own opinions. The reason I mentioned in the first room about residual energy, I mean, I'm an empathetic person. I feel energies maybe more than some. But I think we as humans, we all have that ability, whether we realize it or not. And that's something that you shouldn't discount, because that survival instinct is a big part of that. It's your senses working together to feel about the environment, things that you can't see with your own eyes, but your body can sense and feel. So if you are on the ship, staying as a hotel guest, wandering around the floor, think about how you feel in certain locations. If you ever ever feel like something's watching you, or you get a foreboding sense, or a happy sense, whatever it is, don't discount that. Think about it as your body's way of telling you about the environment that you're in. There might be some weakness to that. And also, I want to leave you with this. We opened by talking about the ship's history. I love the paranormal. I love talking about the deaths and the ghost sightings. But at the end of the day, this is not a ghost ship. This is a piece of history. This is a World War II veteran. And she's a ship that's very popular for a lot of different reasons, and her history is probably the biggest reason. She's seen so much over her lifetime, the best of times, worst of times. And the reason she still exists today is because so many people have fallen in love with her, as I have. They want to come and experience the Queen Mary, and they keep coming back year after year and bringing future generations through here. If you are a local, if you've read the reports, the ship was actually kind of doomed during COVID. Those 3 years they were closed, the city was thinking about getting rid of the ship. They thought about sinking it, turning it into an artificial reef. They thought about dismantling it and selling it for scrap. And so many locals heard about this, and they said, absolutely not, we're not okay with that. And so the city said, you know what, we agree with you. We couldn't see the markets in that way either. So they reopened the doors April 1st. We were fully ready to do so as what they call a soft opening. But the demand has been amazing. Tours have been selling out each and every day. The hotel has been opening up. People are eating in the restaurants, having drinks, and all of that works to just keep her going for years and years to come, hopefully. So thank you guys for coming and supporting her in ways like you are tonight. We really do appreciate it. Now, if you've enjoyed the tour, my name is Tim. If you have not enjoyed the tour, my name is Danny. Feel free to leave a nasty Yelp review. Just use that name, Danny, as many times as possible. I'm kidding. I only say that because he would say the same for me. But you guys are free to go. I'll linger if you have any other questions you didn't want to ask in front of the group. The fastest way out through that gate right there, you can still get back up to the hotel. That way you'll avoid the stairs that way. Just go out this gate, head to your right, and then go back over to the wharf. Show them your room key. They'll let you back up on the ship. But anyway, have a good night, guys.